My father is an avid recreational hunter. He loves to wake up at 4 in the morning, and he would use this kind of contraption, it's called a tree climber, to be about 20 feet above ground, and he would just wait for white-tailed deer to pass by his path. And my father's an expert in one-shot kills. So as soon as the deer comes by, he would make sure with a single bullet, it would go through the heart, so it wouldn't cause pain to the deer and it wouldn't damage the meat. And to me, as a young child in the 80s, I thought, he needed two things. One was a loyal dog companion who would follow him and potentially laugh annoyingly if he missed a shot of a clay pigeon or a duck, which is what my Nintendo game told me. And he also needed a red bandana, because like any popular Halloween costume that year, he could transform into Asian Rambo. And so to me, this was just the coolest thing of everything he could do with this family tradition and these hobbies. And my mother, once the deer was brought at home, she would then dress, skin, butcher deer, marinate it, tenderize it, and dry the meat into delicious venison jerky. So this continued every fall. And then at one point, my feelings toward this hobby and my father's broad familiarity with guns changed when he struck my mother. My story is one of many in light of how ubiquitous domestic violence is in the United States. About 1 in 3 women are affected by it, and it does not discriminate. Regardless of your educational background, socioeconomic status, religion, ethnicity, it affects everyone. And what I want to talk about is the aftermath of what I did as an advocate for my family, and where there are gaps in federal and state laws that could invoke further protection for survivors of domestic violence, and how we also need to think of domestic violence more largely as a family affair. So domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical, emotional, economic, of another person. It usually involves intimate partners. They can be living together, dating, married. And again, anyone is affected by this. So I first asked my mother over the phone, how is she? So she has bruises on her chest and her arm. And she wanted to visit the hospital after the police left. They had arrested him. And I also checked with her and told her, there's nothing that you could have done to justify this. You don't deserve this type of treatment, these actions. I'm here for you if you want us to talk about different experiences and hopes and fears that you have. I'm listening. And you're not alone. And I think that kind of isolation and alienation that some people feel who may be survivors in this type of situation, they are afraid of other family members judging them. And that's why they keep silent about this. Now my mother, you might not know this about her, but she's about 4'10" in height, and she has a personality that's larger than life. And she is able to tell others what is wrong and what is right. And she's single-handedly been the person who called the police when my uncle may have struck my aunt, when my cousin struck my aunt. And other family members said this is a private matter. You shouldn't get involved. But she felt no. Then that just leads to the survivor suffering in silence, and what good can come of that for anyone. And then if you grow up in this kind of environment, you think that this is normal. And so we should think of ways to break that cycle. So in my conversation with my mother, I told her, if you don't want to talk to me, I can get you other people that you may want to talk to. We can discuss the pros and cons of your situation. We have to think of a safety plan. Where do you want to go from here? Because to me, there's so many daunting steps that follow domestic violence and an episode of it. So where will she go? Will she continue living with my father? What will she do because he's a breadwinner? She's also an elder and disabled, and so she depends on him as her caretaker. So it really seemed like an overwhelming kind of situation in some ways. And how some survivors react to this, it's a range of ways. It's ambivalence, denial. Sometimes it's a call to action for others. They might be agitated. So to me, I felt that I wanted her to know that I still love her and I want to be there for her. She told me that she wants to stay strong. And I told her, vulnerability is a sign of strength. You don't always have to be strong. Especially, we need to start thinking about Dad's guns in the house. And when I just thought of my father's hobby that happened to involve guns, I realized that I didn't keep count of how many were in the house. And he had owned any between 5 and 15 guns. And this is a random assortment of rifles, handguns, silencers, scopes. It's quite a collection. But I didn't keep track of it. And so I enlisted my brother for help, and he found one rifle loaded under my parents' bed. I even asked my mom, has there been any times where he's threatened you with a gun? And she told me, at one time when he was angry, he said that he would get his guns and kill everyone in the house. And I told her, you really need to disclose this to everyone. You need to talk to, the hospital staff. You need to talk to the social service agency who I've asked to do outreach, to visit your home, but you didn't say anything about this. And the problem with that is that when nobody knows, now we're just waiting for what he will do with these means to potentially harm others. And we already know in this country what a lethal mix firearms and domestic violence are. So for instance, on a monthly basis, there are about 50 American women who are killed by guns. There are about 1 million women alive today in the United States who has been shot at by a gun, by an intimate partner. So to me, I was extremely worried about the situation. And we already know from some mass shootings that have happened, whether it's San Bernardino, Orlando, Las Vegas, Sutherland Springs, these were connected to domestic violence incidents. And these guns were not taken away from these individuals. And so if we look back at some of the research, and there's limited research out, because around '96, there were prohibitions against federal funds being used to fund research about gun control. But in half the time from 2009 to 2016, these mass shootings were related very much to domestic violence. There are some existing laws that are made to protect people. So the Laudenberg Amendment, it's considered a bare bones amendment to make sure that people who have convictions of domestic violence don't possess firearms. But I'll tell you that arrests and convictions, the time between that can be about 3 months. It depends on the justice system. And so in my parents' case, what I did was, after a mass shooting in Texas, I had emailed the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and I said, I am very concerned that my father has guns in the house. He has threatened my mother to use it. He was arrested for domestic violence. Please tell me what I can do. I even called the local police precinct and asked them, this is the situation. Where can we go from here? And they advised my mother needs to apply for a protective order. And then through that way, the police officers can make sure that he will relinquish his guns. About 48 hours later, the ATF agent emailed me back. I was very surprised. And he told me that we have to wait to see about sentencing and whether your father's convicted. Now, you've probably heard about the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. And the data there is only as good as what is entered, and it's extremely underfunded. So my father would still be listed under this as being eligible to purchase firearms between that time of arrest until conviction. And this goes for any other domestic violence offender. About 2 weeks after that initial reply, the ATF agent said, "The state attorney reviewed this case, and we've determined that your father does meet criteria to have his guns removed." And so they petitioned the local police precinct, who then contacted my family. And so I do celebrate these small victories that can happen when one person takes their initiative. But it is also so ridiculous that I have to send an email to the ATF in order to get guns removed from my house. And if I had not done that, I probably would have to wait a much longer time. So I think we need a few things to change. We need laws that help protect domestic violence survivors and family members. We need enforcement of these laws that are in place. We also need enhanced screening mechanisms at hospitals and outreach programs to ask explicitly, are there guns in the home? We need support for domestic violence survivors and their family members, because as we see, domestic violence is a family affair. It doesn't just involve two people. I'm in graduate school and I teach undergraduates, and I can tell you that when I disclosed this problem to certain instructors, some were extremely helpful to me. They supported me, asked how I was doing, how was the progress of the situation. There were others who their face literally fell. I could see it. Maybe they had never talked to students before that had family members incarcerated for a short or long period of time. I don't know. There's also some who felt that, these deadlines are very strict deadlines for projects. And I want to tell those people that domestic violence doesn't follow the semester system. We need to have more flexible deadlines for undergrad, graduate students who are in these kind of situations and who want to finish their classes successfully, be able to graduate with their degree. And so as a community, we really need to ally together in how we can better support students who are affected by these problems. Because we know that students are involved, we just don't talk about it. A lot of instructors, they probably feel that their idea of helping is that they're a mandated reporter, and they will subsequently report these problems to the local police department, and they will refer students to counseling and mental health services, and that's it. And no, it's a change in empathy that I'd really like to see for some individuals. So during this time that I had to wait about 90 days until the guns were taken away from my parents' house, I knew that there were extreme limitations in my role, even as an advocate. I didn't want to fly over there 900 miles away to my parents' home and get in the middle. I know that I am not invincible to bullets. And I also knew that I couldn't protect my mother. It could potentially happen again. He might strike her again. And my mother chose to reconcile with my father, and I was angry. I was angry that my father had hit her. I was angry that she chose to go back. And I realized, there's a way that we need to mend these kind of relationships, because we need each other. And if I'm going to approach this as a medical anthropologist and as a registered nurse, I need to think about reform and rehabilitation with those closest to me. And so I think of it in terms of this domestic violence incident as an episode. There are maybe some systematic ways that my father has participated in to humiliate her or to exert control over her in the past. He may even do that now. However, I'm happy that he is earnestly engaged in counseling. It's court-appointed, but he's still going, and I'm happy about that. And my mother knows what her needs are, and she knows that she can talk to me about resources. There are also other people in her life that support her. So you can love both people involved in domestic violence and still disapprove of their choices and their behavior. And I'm not going to blame external factors like his anger or stress. No, it's him. He's trying to be accountable. And I also think within this narrative of domestic violence, you can't just easily say it's between villains and victims. I can't talk that way about my parents or my heroes. And there's also loss that happens because home that used to represent comfort and security has changed. But again, I think that we can't go through life always waiting for a crisis to happen in anticipation of the next blow. We have to think about life-affirming, sustaining relationships that are healthy and that help shape us into who we are and how we can help each other. And so when we think about domestic violence and firearms, I hope that we can come together as a community of individuals, organizations, and talk about ways that we can enact these specific ways of telling our representatives that we need certain laws. We need further enforcement of those laws. We need support. And this is a way that we can create a world that is free of violence. And that we can transform these stories of, these histories of violence into stories of wholeness and healing. Thank you.